Okay, like any star of similar mass would do. Like any star would do. Once the sun has exhausted the hydrogen in its core. I think that refers back to once the sun. What is it's referring to? Star. Once the sun has exhausted, it expands into a red giant, eventually ejecting its outer envelope of gases to become a white dwarf. I think this should refer to the sun. Sun is exhausted. Once the sun, yeah, I think this entire thing should refer to the sun. Oh, yeah, it should refer to the sun. Once the sun, so this makes sense. Once the hydrogen, once in the, I don't think that once the hydrogen is exhausted, as in the case of any star. The sun has exhausted the hydrogen. What should come after? Is it the sun? Or is it the hydrogen? Let's begin with that. Once the hydrogen is exhausted. Like any star would do. Like any star of similar mass. I think it's referring to its outer envelope of gases to become a white dwarf. Like any star. So you're referring to a star. So it has to be the sun. So this has to be all gone. I mean, I gotta, that's got to be. As would be the case with any star, once the sun exhausts, oh my God. Once the star exhausts, I think this makes more sense. The sun has exhausted. This was what would do. No, this is hypotheticals actually. This is the usage of would, I think, is hypotheticals. Yeah, like if I was to eat pizza, I would puke. Yeah, once the star has exhausted, once it exhausts, has exhausted. What does has exhausted mean? Isn't that present perfect? Has, yeah. Once the star has exhausted, as if it's the usage of present perfect is suspect here. I'm a bit suspicious regarding the usage of present perfect, whereas this is a bit more generic, i.e. present tense. So I think that makes more sense to me, at least. Once the sun, and also the word it will, once the sun exhausts, it expands. Has exhausted, it expands. I think isn't this showing two, has exhausted is present perfect. This is, I think it expands is present tense. So this seems to be telling me once as it's exhausting, because the impact is on the present tense, I guess it does expand. Eventually ejecting. Oh, okay. It will expand and eventually eject. It will okay. And ejecting its. What isn't this adverbial? So I'm just gonna get rid of this. Ejecting its out, what it expands into a red giant. I think I tend to look at the subject of the adverbial. Can it refer to it? It ejects, it expands. Ejecting its outer envelope of gases. It expands into a red giant, ejecting its outer to become a. What makes more sense? Should it? I think I need a little bit of science here. Background would help. It just makes it unfair for me personally. But once it exhausts, does it? Once oh shit. Once hydrogen is exhausted, does it will expand first, and the expansion is what causes the outer the expansion is what causes the outer envelope to become a white dwarf. Or once the hydrogen is exhausted, it expands and eventually it will expand. It expands as well as eventually eject its out. It will expand and it will expand and it will eject and will eject. Its outer envelope of gases. How can the sun eventually? I don't think the word parallelism makes sense. It will expand, talking about the sun. Well, technically, once the sun exhausts the hydrogen, once the sun exhausts the hydrogen and its exhaust X, what is it referring to? Hydrogen or the sun? Let's assume best case referring to the sun. I think that's an issue, number one. But then it's also a problem here. So maybe I'm looking at has exhausted. Well, it's a problem in both. Hmm. Hmm. What is it referring? It sounds monster. What? It is all over the place. It is here. It is here. Once. So these its are definitely wrong because that's referring to the core. That's different. This it has extra the hydrogen. It expands. I think it has to mean logically the sun. The sun expands. Eject. How can the sun expand in? How can the sun eventually eject its outer envelope of gases to become a white dwarf? I mean, this is what this is referring to. Is somehow it's saying if I because of the parallelism that this is what is kicking off that it once the sun exhausts once the sun exhausts the hydrogen, the sun will eventually eject its. Hmm, is that once this happens, I will expand into a red giant. I will eventually once I guess once the sun exhausts, it will eject its outer envelope of gases. It will expand and also eject its outer envelope. I thoroughly think that it's okay that the sun ejects its outer envelope as once the sun exhausts the hydrogen. Well, I guess that you can go back to grammar now. Like any star would. I don't know what the rule is. Would do, like any star would do. As hmm, I think between A and E, I'm not sure. I personally think that it's okay to have, once the sun exhausts, it will expand and it will eject, because the this I know is talking about the event, and eject is outer envelope. So two things are happening at the same time. Whereas in this case, it's one causing the other. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but I don't think the GMAT will ask you to look at that. So maybe it's a non-error to begin with. Once the sun has exhausted, once the sun exhausts, it will expand. I'm not too happy with regards. So I don't think this is an issue. I think it's okay to say this personally, even though I know that the sun itself is doing the kicking. I'm up. Where is the sign? I'm personally okay with this. Um, I'm personally okay with this. Once the sun, I think maybe once the sun has exhausted, referring to the is referring to something in the present tense. Once the sun exhausts, I think I like the tense issue better. So I think I'll select A or E because of tense. I don't know about any of this grammar rubbish over here. As would be the case, as would. I know as is used, but it can be used with prepositions also. I'm pretty sure as would. Yeah, I'm not sure. I like the tense for E, E a bit better. Thank you.